The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years. In all that time, they had seen species rise and fall. They had watched empires crumble and new ones take their place. They thought they understood everything about how the universe worked. They were wrong. When humans first made contact with the galaxy, the Council dismissed them. Earth was a small planet on the edge of a minor spiral arm. Humans were young, barely a few 100,000 years old as a species. They had only achieved space travel in the last century of their existence. By galactic standards, they were infants. The Vorthan ambassador was the first to speak about them in the Great Chamber. His species had ruled their sector for 5 million years. Their skin was gray like stone, and their eyes saw in spectrums that humans could not imagine. He stood before the assembled delegates and waved one of his 4 arms in dismissal. "These humans are nothing special," he said. "They are weak. They die easily. Their bodies break down after only 80 or 90 of their years. They cannot survive in vacuum. They cannot breathe underwater. They cannot regulate their own body temperature properly. I have studied them and I find nothing remarkable." The other ambassadors clicked and hummed and buzzed in agreement. The crystalline beings from the Andromeda sector flashed their approval in patterns of light. The gas giants of the Nebula Collective rumbled their consensus. The insectoid hive of Sector 7 sent chemical signals of agreement through the chamber's air filters. But there was one ambassador who did not agree. Her name was Kiera Sal, and she belonged to a species called the Watchers. Her people were old, older even than the Vorthan. They did not rule or conquer. They simply observed. They had watched the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations, and they had learned something important. The most dangerous things in the universe were often the ones that seemed weakest at first. Kiera Sal had visited Earth. She had walked among the humans in disguise. She had seen something in them that the others had missed, but she said nothing in that meeting. She only watched and waited. She knew that time would prove her right. 10 years passed. The humans spread slowly through their local cluster. They established colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. They built space stations and mining operations. They were careful and methodical. They made friends where they could and avoided conflict when possible. The first real test came when they encountered the Kreth. The Kreth were slavers. They had operated in the outer regions for 3,000 years and no one had ever stopped them. They preyed on young species, capturing their people and selling them to the highest bidder. When they found humanity, they saw easy prey. The Kreth attacked the human colony on Proxima Centauri B without warning. They came with 20 ships and 10,000 soldiers. They expected the humans to surrender immediately. Every other young species had done so. The Kreth had never lost a harvesting raid. But the humans did not surrender. The colony had only 2,000 people. They had 3 small defense ships and weapons that the Kreth considered primitive. By every calculation, they should have been overwhelmed in hours. Instead, the battle lasted for 6 days. The humans fought with a fury that the Kreth had never seen. When their ships were destroyed, they fought from the ground. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they fought with tools and bare hands. When the Kreth broke through the outer defenses, the humans retreated to the inner compound and kept fighting. On the 3rd day, a human woman named Maria Santos led a counterattack that destroyed 4 Kreth ships. She flew a mining vessel loaded with explosives directly into their formation. She died in the explosion, but her sacrifice turned the tide of the battle. The Kreth had never seen anything like it. They did not understand why anyone would trade their own life for the lives of others. On the 6th day, human reinforcements arrived from Earth. They were too late to save the colony completely. 800 humans had died in the battle, but the Kreth had lost all 20 of their ships and nearly all of their soldiers. The survivors fled back to their home territory with a warning: do not touch the humans again. News of the battle spread through the galaxy. Some species were impressed, others were disturbed. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss what had happened. Once again, the Vorthan ambassador spoke first. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "The humans won through luck and desperation. Any cornered animal will fight. This does not make them special." But others were not so sure. The crystalline beings had analyzed the battle recordings. They had seen something they could not explain. The humans had not fought just to survive. They had fought for something else, something the crystalline beings could not identify. There was a concept in the human communications that they did not have a word for in their own language. They asked the human representative to explain. His name was David Chen, and he was the first human to stand before the Galactic Council. He was small by the standards of most galactic species. He stood barely 2 meters tall, with no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. He looked fragile and temporary, but when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "You want to know why we fought?" he asked. "Why we would not surrender even when logic said we should?" The council waited. David Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made some of the older species uncomfortable. "We fought because of hope," he said. "We hoped that our reinforcements would arrive in time. We hoped that our children would grow up free. We hoped that our sacrifice would mean something. Hope is what kept us fighting when everything said we should stop." The Vorthan ambassador made a sound of contempt. "Hope, that is just a word for foolishness. You hoped, and 800 of your people died. What is there to celebrate in that?" David Chen looked at the ambassador for a long moment. "The Kreth will never raid our colonies again," he said. "Our people died so that others would not have to. That is what hope gives us. Not the certainty of victory, but the strength to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible. And sometimes that is enough." The council dismissed his words. They recorded the battle as an anomaly and moved on to other business. But Kira Sal of the Watchers did not dismiss anything. She had seen hope before in other species in other times. It was rare and precious and more powerful than any weapon. She knew that the humans had just introduced something new to the galaxy, something that could not be contained or controlled. She began to watch the humans more closely, and she waited to see what would happen next. 3 years after the Battle of Proxima Centauri B, a plague swept through the Velani home world. The Velani were a peaceful species who lived in the forests of their green planet. They had no army and no enemies. They had joined the Galactic Council 2,000 years ago and had contributed greatly to the arts and sciences. But they had no defense against the sickness that was killing them. The plague was called the Gray Death because of what it did to its victims. Their skin turned gray and hard like stone. Their organs failed one by one. Death came slowly and painfully over the course of 3 weeks. There was no cure. The Velani sent desperate messages to every corner of the galaxy. They begged for help. They offered everything they had in exchange for a cure, but species after species turned them away. The risk of contamination was too great. The plague was too dangerous. No one wanted to expose themselves to the Gray Death. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. They debated for 6 days while the Velani died by the millions. In the end, they voted to quarantine the Velani home world. No ships would be allowed in or out. The planet would be sealed until the plague ran its course. If the Velani survived, they would be welcomed back into galactic society. If they did not, their world would be sterilized and their memory honored. It was a logical decision. It was the safe decision. It was the decision that every member of the council agreed to, except one. David Chen stood before the council and spoke against the quarantine. "You are condemning an entire species to death," he said. "There are 3 billion Velani. You cannot simply write them off." The Vorthan ambassador was unmoved. "What would you have us do? Risk our own people? The plague could spread to other worlds if we intervene. We must think of the greater good." "Then let us go," David Chen said. "Let humanity help them." The council fell silent. The idea was absurd. The humans had no special immunity to the plague. They had no advanced medical technology. If they went to the Vellani home world, they would almost certainly die alongside the Vellani. Why? The Vorthan ambassador asked. Why would you do such a thing? David Chen's answer was simple, because someone should. The council allowed the humans to try. They expected nothing to come of it. They thought the humans would send a few researchers who would die quickly and accomplish nothing. They were wrong again. Humanity sent everything they had, 20 ships, 5,000 medical personnel, every doctor, nurse, and researcher who volunteered, and thousands did. They knew the risks. They went anyway. Dr. Sarah Mitchell led the medical team. She was 62 years old and had spent her entire life fighting diseases on Earth. She had survived 3 outbreaks that should have killed her. When asked why she was going to the Vellani home world, she laughed. I have been fighting death my whole life, she said. I am not going to stop now. The human medical team arrived on the Vellani home world and found horror. The cities were full of the dying and the dead. The Vellani medical system had collapsed. Those who were not sick were caring for those who were, and there were not enough healthy Vellani left to do even that. The humans got to work immediately. They set up field hospitals. They organized the healthy Vellani into care teams. They collected samples and began analyzing the plague. They worked around the clock, sleeping in shifts, pushing themselves beyond exhaustion. For the first month, they made no progress. The plague continued to spread. Humans began to fall sick alongside the Vellani. 17 human doctors and nurses died in the first 6 weeks, but the others kept working. Dr. Mitchell pushed her team harder than anyone. She slept 3 hours a night. She personally treated hundreds of patients. When the plague finally infected her, she refused to stop working. She continued her research from her hospital bed, writing notes with hands that shook and trembled. We are close, she told her team. I can feel it, do not give up now. The breakthrough came on day 47. A young researcher named James Park discovered that the plague had a weakness. It could not survive in the presence of a certain compound found in human blood. The compound was rare, but it could be synthesized. It would take time to produce enough for 3 billion Vellani, but it was possible. Dr. Mitchell lived long enough to hear the news. She smiled and closed her eyes and died peacefully in her sleep that night. She was the 34th human to die on the Vellani home world. She would not be the last. Over the next 6 months, humanity poured resources into producing the cure. They built factories on the Vellani home world. They shipped materials from Earth and their colonies. They trained Vellani workers to help with production. Slowly, the tide turned. The Grey Death began to retreat. In the end, 2 billion Vellani survived. 1 billion died. It was a tragedy, but it was not extinction. The Vellani species would continue. Their culture would endure. Their children would grow up and have children of their own. The cost to humanity was high. 112 humans died on the Vellani home world. Another 300 died in the supply missions. The financial cost was staggering. Humanity had spent resources that would have taken decades to replace. When asked why they had done it, the human representative to the council gave the same answer as before. Because someone should. Because we could not stand by and watch an entire species die. Because we hoped that we could make a difference, and we did. The Galactic Council did not know how to respond. No species had ever sacrificed so much for another without expecting something in return. The Vellani tried to offer payment, but the humans refused. They asked only for friendship. The Vellani gave them something more. They gave them gratitude, and they gave them a story. They told their children about the humans who came when everyone else turned away. They told them about Dr. Mitchell and James Park and all the others who died so that strangers could live. They told them about hope. And the story spread. The Vellani told other species. Those species told others. Within a decade, everyone in the galaxy had heard about what the humans had done. Some dismissed it as foolishness. Others were moved by it, but everyone remembered it. Kira Sal of the Watchers watched all of this with growing fascination. She had seen hope before, but she had never seen it spread like this. The humans were not just keeping hope for themselves. They were giving it away. They were teaching other species that sacrifice and courage could mean something, that the darkness could be pushed back, that the future did not have to be a copy of the past. She began to wonder what would happen next. She did not have to wait long to find out. The dominion of the eternal night had ruled the core regions of the galaxy for 8,000 years. They were not a single species, but a collection of species bound together by fear. The dominion's rulers were called the Shadow Lords, and they were ancient and terrible. No one knew what they truly looked like. They appeared only as darkness, as voids in space that devoured light and hope. The Shadow Lords had built their empire through terror. They did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They simply crushed anyone who stood against them. Species that submitted were allowed to exist as servants. Species that resisted were destroyed completely. Their worlds were burned, their people killed, their names erased from history. For 8,000 years, no one had challenged the Dominion. The Galactic Council pretended they did not exist. They drew borders and made agreements that kept the Dominion's territory separate from the rest of the galaxy. It was a peace built on cowardice, and everyone knew it. But the Shadow Lords were not content with their empire. They wanted more. They always wanted more. And in the year that humans called 2157, they began to expand again. The first targets were the outer colonies of the free species. The Shadow Lords sent their fleet, 1,000 ships of black metal that seemed to drink in the light around them. They attacked without warning and without mercy. 3 colonies fell in the first week. 10 more fell in the month that followed. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. The debates lasted for days. Some species wanted to fight. Others wanted to negotiate. Most wanted to simply retreat and hope the Shadow Lords would be satisfied with what they had taken. The human representative stood and asked for permission to speak. The council granted it reluctantly. They expected another lecture about hope and sacrifice. They got something different. "We know what you are planning," David Chen said. "You are going to give the Shadow Lords what they want. You are going to sacrifice the outer colonies to save yourselves. You have done it before, and you are going to do it again." The council shifted uncomfortably. No one denied his words. "Humanity will not join you in this," David Chen continued. "We will not abandon those colonies. We will not pretend that the people there do not matter. We are going to fight." The Vorthan ambassador laughed. "Fight? With what? You have a few hundred ships. The Shadow Lords have thousands. You will be destroyed." "Perhaps," David Chen agreed. "But perhaps not. And even if we are destroyed, we will have shown the galaxy that the Shadow Lords can be resisted. We will have given others the courage to fight after us. That is worth something." "It is worth nothing," the Vorthan ambassador said. "You will die and nothing will change." David Chen smiled that smile again, the one that made some species uncomfortable. "We will see." Humanity went to war against the dominion of the eternal night. They sent every ship they had, 347 vessels of various sizes. It was a pitiful force compared to the Shadow Lord's armada. Everyone expected the war to be over in days. The first battle took place in the Kepler system. The humans arrived to find the Shadow Lords already there, preparing to destroy the colony on the 4th planet. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1. Admiral James Rodriguez commanded the human forces. He was 70 years old and had served in the human military for 50 years. He had never lost a battle. He did not intend to start now. "All ships," he said over the communication channel. "Remember why we are here. Remember who we are fighting for. Remember that every moment we buy is a moment for the evacuation ships to escape. We do not need to win. We just need to hold." The battle lasted for 18 hours. The humans fought with everything they had. They used tactics that the Shadow Lords had never seen. They rammed their damaged ships into enemy vessels. They fired every weapon until the barrels melted. They refused to retreat, refused to surrender, refused to die quietly. When it was over, the human fleet was reduced to 93 ships, but the Shadow Lords had lost over 200 vessels. More importantly, the evacuation ships had escaped. 150,000 civilians had been saved. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. No one had ever hurt the Shadow Lords like that. No one had ever made them pay such a price. The humans had not won, but they had not lost either. They had proven that the Dominion was not invincible. Other species began to take notice. The Vellani offered to send ships to help the humans. They had never had a military before, but they were willing to build one. "You saved us," they said. "Now we will fight beside you." The crystalline beings of Andromeda were next. They had no interest in war, but they had technology that could help. They offered to share their shield systems with the human fleet. "We have watched you," they said. "We have seen your hope. We want to believe in it too." More species followed. Some sent ships. Others sent supplies, weapons, intelligence. The coalition grew slowly at first, then faster. Within a year, the human fleet had grown from 300 ships to 3,000. The Shadow Lords were not worried at first. They had crushed coalitions before. They had broken alliances and scattered enemies. They sent their full armada to destroy the humans once and for all. The Second Battle of Kepler was the largest space battle in galactic history. 10,000 human and allied ships faced 15,000 Shadow Lord vessels. The fighting lasted for 3 days. The darkness itself seemed to be at war. Admiral Rodriguez died in the first day of fighting. His ship was destroyed by concentrated fire from a dozen enemy vessels. But before he died, he sent one final message to his fleet. "Do not mourn me," he said. "I have lived a good life. I have fought for something that matters. If we win today, the galaxy will never be the same. If we lose, others will rise to continue our fight. Either way, the Shadow Lords will learn that hope is not so easily destroyed. Now fight. Fight for everything we believe in. Fight for the future." The battle turned on the second day. The Allied fleet executed a maneuver that the Shadow Lords had never seen. They split into 3 groups and attacked from different angles. The Shadow Lord command structure could not respond fast enough. Their formation broke apart. On the third day, the Shadow Lords retreated for the first time in 8,000 years. They left behind 4,000 destroyed vessels and the bodies of millions of their soldiers. The Allied fleet had lost nearly as many, but they had won. The victory at Kepler changed everything. Species that had been afraid to resist began to fight back. Worlds that had been conquered rose up against their occupiers. The Dominion, which had seemed eternal and unstoppable, began to crumble from within. The war lasted for another 10 years. It was brutal and costly. Humanity lost half of its population. Other species lost even more. But in the end, the Shadow Lords were defeated. Their empire fell, and the species they had enslaved were freed. When it was over, the Galactic Council gathered to discuss the future. They needed to decide how to organize the galaxy now that the Dominion was gone. They needed leaders, and everyone looked to the humans. But the human representative, a woman named Elena Vasquez, refused the position. "We did not fight to rule," she said. "We fought because it was right. We fought because we hoped for a better galaxy. That hope belongs to everyone, not just to us." She proposed something new. Instead of one species ruling over others, they would create a true partnership. Every species would have an equal voice. Every species would contribute what they could. Every species would be responsible for each other. It was called the Hope Alliance, and it was built on the principles that humanity had spread throughout the galaxy. Courage, sacrifice, the belief that the future could be better than the past, the understanding that one person, one species, one moment of bravery could change everything. Kira Sal of the Watchers spoke for the first time in 1,000 years. I have watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than most of you can imagine. I have seen empires built on power and fear. I have seen them all crumble in the end. But I have never seen what I am seeing now. The humans have given the galaxy something precious. They have given us hope. And hope, I am learning, is the most powerful force in the universe. The Hope Alliance was born that day. And across the galaxy, species that had never believed in anything began to believe in something at last. 50 years after the fall of the Dominion, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Hope Alliance had grown to include every known species. Wars still happened, but they were smaller and rarer. Disease outbreaks were met with coordinated responses. Natural disasters brought aid from across the stars. But the greatest change was not in politics or military power. It was in how species thought about themselves and each other. On the Vorthan home world, a young Vorthan named Kethmar stood before his elders. He was proposing something that would have been unthinkable a century ago. He wanted to establish a school where Vorthan children would study alongside children from other species. He wanted them to learn not just facts and skills, but values, courage, compassion, hope. The elders were skeptical. "We are Vorthan," one of them said. "We have survived for 5 million years by being strong and independent. Why should we change?" Kethmar had prepared for this question. He had studied human history extensively. He had visited Earth and lived among humans for 2 years. He understood something that his elders did not. "We survived for 5 million years," he agreed. "But we did not thrive. We did not grow. We looked at the galaxy and saw only threats and opportunities. We never saw friends. We never saw partners. We never saw hope." He pointed to the stars visible through the chamber's great window. "Look at what is happening out there. Species that were enemies for thousands of years are now working together. Worlds that were dying are being restored. Problems that seemed unsolvable are being solved. This is not happening because of strength or independence. It is happening because of hope, because the humans showed us another way." The elders debated for 3 days. In the end, they approved the school. It was called the Mitchell Academy, named after the human doctor who had died saving the Vellani. Its motto was simple: "Together we hope." Similar changes were happening everywhere. On the gas giants of the Nebula Collective, a young scientist proposed a project to terraform dead worlds and give them to species that had lost their homes. The project would take centuries and cost more resources than any single species could afford. But the scientist argued that it was worth doing anyway. "We have always thought in terms of our own lifetimes," she said. "We have always asked what benefits us now, but the humans think differently. They plant trees whose shade they will never enjoy. They build structures that will outlast them by millennia. They sacrifice for generations they will never meet. And because of this, they create things that no individual could create alone." The terraforming project was approved. It was called Project Genesis, and it was the largest cooperative effort in galactic history. Every species contributed what they could. The gas giants provided the raw materials. The crystalline beings provided the energy. The insectoid hive provided the labor. Humanity provided the vision and the hope. The first new world was completed in the year 2250. It was a small planet, barely larger than Earth's moon, but it was beautiful. It had blue oceans and green forests and clean air. It was given to a species called the Wanderers, who had lost their home to the Shadow Lords generations ago. For the first time in 300 years, they had a place to call their own. The Wanderers' leader, an elderly female named Sierra, stood on the surface of her new home and wept. She had been born in exile. She had never expected to set foot on a world that belonged to her people. When asked how she felt, she could barely speak. "I had given up hope," she said. "I thought we would wander forever. I thought our children would never know what it meant to have a home. But the humans taught us that hope is never truly lost. It just needs someone to keep it alive." The galaxy continued to change. Old enemies became friends. Old wounds began to heal. Species that had been isolated for millennia opened their borders and their hearts. It was not a perfect transformation. There were setbacks and disappointments and failures, but the direction was clear. The galaxy was becoming something better. On Earth, humanity had changed too. They had grown from a small species on a single planet to a civilization spanning dozens of worlds. Their population had recovered from the losses of the war. Their technology had advanced beyond what they could have imagined a century ago. But the biggest change was in how they saw themselves. They were no longer just humans from Earth. They were part of something larger. They had helped to build the Hope Alliance. They had spread their most precious gift across the stars, and they had learned something important in return. Elena Vasquez, now an old woman, spoke about this at the 100th anniversary celebration of the Hope Alliance. She stood before an audience that included representatives from every known species. Her voice was weaker than it had been, but her words were still clear. 100 years ago, we were a young species that most of the galaxy dismissed. We were weak and short-lived and fragile, but we had something that we did not fully understand ourselves. We had hope. She paused and looked out at the assembled crowd. Vorthan and Velani, crystalline beings and gas giants. Insectoid hive members and wanderers, all of them together, all of them listening. Hope is strange, she continued. You cannot hold it in your hands. You cannot measure it or weigh it. But it is real. It is perhaps the most real thing in the universe. It is what makes us keep trying when logic says we should stop. It is what makes us reach out to strangers and see them as friends. It is what makes us believe that tomorrow can be better than today. She smiled, and even now, even after all these years, that smile had power. We gave hope to the galaxy, but the galaxy gave us something in return. It gave us meaning. It showed us that our hope was not foolishness, as some had said. It was our greatest strength. And now that hope belongs to everyone, it will continue to spread long after we are gone until it reaches the farthest stars and the most distant futures. That is our legacy. That is what we leave behind. The celebration continued through the night. There was music and dancing and laughter. Species that had once been enemies embraced like old friends. Children played together without knowing or caring about the differences between them. Kira Sal of the Watchers attended the celebration. She was ancient now, one of the oldest living beings in the galaxy. She had seen more than anyone could imagine, but she still found herself moved by what she witnessed. A young human child approached her. The child was perhaps 5 years old, small and fragile by galactic standards. She looked up at Kira Sal with curious eyes. "Are you a watcher?" the child asked. "I am," Kira Sal answered. "What do you watch?" Kira Sal considered the question. She had been watching civilizations for millions of years. She had seen so much that most of it had blurred together, but recently something had changed. She was no longer just watching. She was participating. She was hopping. "I watch hope," she said finally. "I watch it grow and spread. I watch it change things that seemed unchangeable. I watch it prove that the universe is more wonderful than anyone imagined." The child nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My grandmother says that hope is like fire. It starts small, but it can light up everything." Kira Sal smiled. "Your grandmother is very wise." The child ran off to play with her friends, Vorthan and Velani, and human children all together. Kira Sal watched her go and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope, not the careful, measured observation of hope that she had practiced for so long. Real hope, personal hope, the belief that the future would be good. The humans had done this. This small, fragile, short-lived species had changed everything. They had taken something that was inside them and given it to the entire galaxy. And now that gift was bearing fruit everywhere she looked. Hope spread through the galaxy like fire, and wherever it touched, darkness retreated. This was the legacy of humanity. This was their gift to the stars, and it would burn on forever, lighting the way to a future that no one could have imagined but everyone could now hope for. 1,000 years passed. The galaxy continued to grow and change. The Hope Alliance became the Hope Civilization, a single interconnected society that spanned the entire Milky Way and had begun to reach toward other galaxies. Species that had once been strangers were now as close as family. The old divisions and conflicts seemed like ancient history, barely remembered except in the archives. Earth had become a sacred place, not in a religious sense, but in the sense that everyone recognized its importance. This was where humanity had begun. This was where hope had first taken its galactic form. Visitors came from every corner of the known universe to walk its surface and breathe its air and feel connected to something larger than themselves. The Memorial of Hope stood in what had once been called the United States. It was a simple structure, just a tall pillar of white stone with names carved into its surface. The names of Dr. Sarah Mitchell and Admiral James Rodriguez and Elena Vasquez. The names of all the humans who had died spreading hope across the stars. There were millions of names, and more were added every year. At the base of the pillar, there was a single sentence carved in every language known to galactic civilization. It said, "They hoped, and hope became real." Visitors came to the memorial every day. They stood before the pillar and read the names and felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Some wept. Some laughed with joy. Some simply stood in silence and thought about what it all meant. One such visitor was a being named Quetzal. He was a hybrid, born of a Vorthan father and a human mother. Such combinations were common now. Species had interbred and mixed and created new forms of life. Quetzal had gray skin like a Vorthan but eyes that sparkled with human warmth. He was old by human standards, nearly 200 years but young by Vorthan standards. He had come to the memorial because he was troubled. The Hope civilization faced a new challenge, one that no one had faced before. Explorers had discovered something at the edge of the universe, something vast and ancient and cold, something that seemed to be the opposite of everything the Hope civilization stood for. They called it the Void. It was not darkness, not in the way the Shadow Lords had been. It was something worse. It was emptiness. It was the absence of meaning. Where the void touched, beings lost their hope. They lost their desire to live. They simply stopped, frozen in a kind of living death. The void was spreading, slowly but surely. No one knew where it came from or how to stop it. Some said it was the natural end of all things. Some said it was a punishment for reaching too far. Some said it was simply the universe reminding everyone that hope was temporary. Quetzal did not know what to believe. He had come to the memorial looking for answers. He stood before the pillar of names and tried to feel what the visitors said they felt. Connection, purpose, hope, but all he felt was fear. "You are troubled." Quetzal turned. Standing beside him was a being unlike any he had seen before. She was humanoid but seemed to be made of light. She glowed with a soft warmth that made Quetzal feel slightly better despite himself. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Hope," the being said. "That is not my birth name, but it is the name I chose for myself long ago. I am the last of the Watchers." Quetzal stared at her. The Watchers were legendary. They were the oldest species in the galaxy, older even than the records of history, and this being claimed to be one of them. "The last?" he asked. Hope nodded. "My people watched for too long, we never participated, we never hoped. In the end, most of us simply faded away. But I chose differently. I chose to embrace what the humans taught us. I chose to hope. And because I hoped, I survived." She gestured at the pillar of names. "I knew many of these people. I watched Maria Santos fly her ship into the Kreth Formation. I watched Dr. Mitchell work until her last breath. I watched Elena Vasquez refuse power and offer partnership instead. They were remarkable beings. Small and fragile and short-lived, but remarkable." "What made them so special?" Quetzal asked. "What did they have that others did not?" Hope considered the question. She had been thinking about it for 1,000 years, and she still was not sure she understood completely. They had the ability to believe in things they could not see, she said finally. They could imagine a future that did not yet exist and work to make it real. They could look at the darkness and see the possibility of light. They could face death and still choose to hope. But how? Quetzal pressed. The void is coming. It is the end of all things. How can anyone hope in the face of that? Hope smiled, and Quetzal felt the warmth of it wash over him. Do you know why the humans called it hope? She asked. They could have called it optimism or faith or determination, but they chose hope, and hope is different from all of those things. Hope does not require certainty. Hope does not require logic. Hope is the choice to believe that things can get better even when there is no evidence that they will. She pointed at the names on the pillar. These people did not know that they would succeed. Dr. Mitchell did not know that she would find a cure. Admiral Rodriguez did not know that his fleet would win. Elena Vasquez did not know that her alliance would survive, but they hoped anyway, and their hope made the difference. Quetzal felt something stirring inside him. It was small and fragile like a flame in a wind, but it was there. What should I do? He asked. About the void. Hope placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and comforting. Do what the humans would have done, she said. Face it, study it, fight it if you can, and above all, hope. Hope that you will find a way. Hope that the future will be better. Hope that the light will push back the darkness one more time. And if we fail, then others will continue after you. That is how hope works. It passes from one being to another, from one generation to the next, from one species to all species. It is not something that can be destroyed. It can only be passed on. Quetzal stood at the memorial for a long time after Hope left. He looked at the names and thought about the people they represented. He thought about the challenges they had faced and the victories they had won. He thought about the hope they had spread across the galaxy. And then he made a decision. He would face the void. He would study it and fight it and hope with everything he had. He would not give in to despair. He would carry the torch that the humans had lit 1,000 years ago. He touched the pillar one last time, running his fingers over the ancient names. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for teaching us to hope. Then he turned and walked away, heading toward the ships that would take him to the edge of the universe. He did not know if he would succeed. He did not know if the void could be stopped. But he had hope, and hope was enough to take the first step. Behind him, the memorial of hope stood in the morning sunlight. The names carved into its surface seemed to glow with a light of their own. And if anyone had been watching closely, they might have seen the light growing stronger, spreading outward, reaching toward the stars. Hope spread through the galaxy like fire. It had started with one small species on one small planet. It had grown to encompass everything. And now, 1,000 years later, it was still burning. It would always be burning, because that was what hope did. It endured. It spread. It lit the way through the darkness, no matter how deep that darkness might be. The humans had given the galaxy hope, and hope had become the most powerful force in the universe. It had conquered fear. It had defeated despair. It had transformed a galaxy of strangers into a civilization of friends. And now it would face the greatest challenge of all. The void was coming, but hope was ready. It had been born in fire, tested in war, and proven across 1,000 years of growth and change. It would not fail now. It could not fail, because hope was not just an idea or a feeling. It was the essence of what it meant to be alive. And as long as beings lived and dreamed and hoped, the light would never go out. This was the gift that humanity had given to the stars. This was their legacy. This was their hope. And it would burn on forever.